if we need to watch it back for notes later. So I'm just gonna start that recording just so folks know. But thank you all so much for coming. I'm so glad to see such a good turnout. I'm sure we might have a few more people trickle in too, which is totally fine. For those who don't know me, my name is Mindy Goodrum. I work at FB Environmental. We're a small environmental consulting firm in Portland, and we've been working with the Peaks community for a few years now, starting with an assessment a few years ago, and really excited to see that work continuing through this group. So I did pull the agenda up on the screen for folks, but I can share my screen so the folks on Zoom can see it as well. It's the same agenda that I sent around if I can figure out how to do that online. Okay. Let's pull these guys back up so we can see them. All right. Pardon for the bit of a clunky start, but there we go. Okay. So I think a lot of you probably know each other, but not everybody. So I thought we'd just do a quick round of introductions so that everyone knows who's here. Instead of going around the room, I thought it might be useful this is a meeting for the Peaks Island Working Group. I thought it might be helpful to have the folks that are on the main working group introduce themselves first. And then I know we have some other guests here that are interested in the climate change topic that we're here to talk about today. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves after, but I thought I'd start with the working group so everyone knows kind of who those main contacts are. So I can kind of popcorn us around the room if that's helpful. I could also let my colleague Maggie introduce herself next.
Sure, yeah. Maggie Mills, I work with Mindy at FB Environmental, and as Mindy said, we worked together on the first assessment, so really excited that got some grant funds here to keep this moving. Looking forward to the chat.
And maybe I'll pop it over to Mary Ann next. So Pete is the one who got this grant to fund this working group.
Yes, I'm Mary Ann Mitchell with Pete.
And Kim is also
with Kim Peasley. I'm also new to Pete.
New, but glad to have you on board. I just have a list here, so I'm just going to go down the list. I'll do the folks in the room first. Stephen.
Part of the original assessment team. So happy, Mary Ann, and everybody on Pete went after this grant. Much appreciated to keep this mission moving forward.
Thank you, Stephen.
And Tanya.
I don't need to say anything soon to say
it. Troy.
Hey everyone, I've met many people, but not everyone. I'm Troy Moon. I'm the Director of Sustainability for the City of Portland. I'm really excited to be involved with this project, really important discussion, and it'll help inform our larger climate and resilience planning work that we are kind of getting underway during the upcoming years.
Laura?
Oh, yeah.
I'm Laura Glendenning. I'm on the Island Council.
Perry's not here, but Perry would be on the working group as well to kind of help represent the Peaks Island Fund. Jeff?
Jeff Phillips, Canadian Peaks Island Health Association.
Robert?
Robert Fender Stano from Peaks Island Land Preserve.
Deanne?
Jean,
Sorry.
it's okay. Jean Dolnick. I am representing the school at the President Bowl.
Thank you for coming.
And just say, I'm so glad to see you here from the city. This thing, it's really nice to have this be a bigger conversation.
I'm super happy to be part of it.
And then we've got a couple members on Zoom. Bill, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Bill Zimmerman. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but we're getting ready for entertaining some folks from town that we're hoping will do some funding for projects. So Patty and I are anxious to see this project move forward. We've been involved with Stephen and Tanya and FB Environmental for a few years now. With the creation of the assessment, and we're just thrilled that everybody's still involved with it. So thank you for your time and for keeping this thing going.
And Bryn, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. I'm very excited to be participating in this group. My wife Marcy and I have owned a home on Peaks Island since 1999. We now live full-time in Maine, and in the winters, we're at Highland Green, a retirement community up in Topsom. I worked on the education portion of the Z Foundation's report on the culture of the island at Bill's invitation and enjoyed it immensely. And I'm happy to be on this committee and to listen, find out what's going on the island and how we can keep moving ahead and bringing many of the recommendations and ideas in the report to fruition.
Great. So these are kind of the main working group folks that we've gone through. And if you don't know what I mean by the working group, I will talk a little more about that after we've gone through the rest of the introductions. I just thought it'd be nice to meet everybody before we jump too far into the details. So I'll have the rest of the folks introduce themselves too. Maybe I'll just keep going on the Zoom. If you want to introduce yourself, Abby?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Roach. I work at Island Institute. Grateful other folks in person there have their hats on. I waffled if I should wear my beanie, but after my walk this morning, it's so cold. I will talk a little bit more about the work that Island Institute is doing that may involve Peaks Island and has the opportunity to involve with my colleague Emma, who will also introduce herself. Thanks for letting us join.
I can jump in as well, I guess. Hi, I'm Emma Polimas. I am a short course steward hosted at Island Institute. As Abby said, we can talk a little bit more about that work as well, but I focus on nature-based strategies for coastal erosion, and we'll hopefully be bringing that work to Peaks in the spring.
Thank you guys. And then maybe I'll just go around the room for the folks in here that haven't introduced themselves yet. I don't know all your names, so maybe I'll just start with Alexi, and anyone who hasn't introduced themselves can go around. But
I'm Alexi. I worked for Public Works for the last 2 or 3 summers, and I'm probably going to be a future Public Works full-time employee here, so I thought it would be interesting to see everybody. Yeah.
I'm Ann Kersley. I am a year-round resident on the island. I'm a landscape architect, designer. I'm very interested in the work that FB, Lauren Sheridan have done before to be part of the solution.
And Anne and Stephen and Tanya helped lead, like in early November, we brought a group of planners out on the island that were at a planning conference in Portland. And so
Froze them.
we froze them. They all said they were all from Vermont, and they signed up for the mobile tour on Peaks Island and come see what's going on out here. But so yeah, that was fun, and helped us lead that tour.
a couple of folks in the back. Do you guys want to just introduce yourselves really quickly?
Sure. I'm Sarah. I oversee the after school program for the city at the elementary school, and then also help with programming at the community center and other recreation.
Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure if my email went through to you, so I'm
Yeah,
glad you
sorry
made
for
it.
me.
Yes, I'm Todd Ramachili. I was not in a bar fight. Just so you're. And I've been in and out of this issue. I'm ready to get to work.
Awesome. Thanks for coming. Is it Todd?
Yes, Todd.
Todd, okay.
Ramachili.
Okay, and then
I'm Ann Whitman. I have in the past volunteered for
I'm Ben McKenna. I'm the editor at Peaks Island News.
Thanks for coming. Great. Well, what a fun crew we have today. So I can jump in to kind of give you an overview of what this group is and why we're here today, just to kind of set the stage. I know a lot of you know this information already, but I want to just make sure we're all on the same starting page for this project. So as I mentioned, the Peaks Island Environmental Action Team got this grant from the Casco Bay Estuaries Partnership to form this working group. The point of the working group is kind of to bring together this multidisciplinary group. As you kind of heard in the introductions, we've got folks that are working in education and mental health and climate change and all kinds of different areas on the island. So to bring them together to help kind of holistically plan the island's future. They're kind of carrying forth the recommendations in that 2023 assessment that I mentioned, as well as we did work with the community last year to do a survey and a big workshop. Many of you were at that workshop. So we got a lot of good feedback from the community on their priorities out of those two activities. So this grant is to fund the first 3 meetings and the formation of this working group. And so we're going to focus these first 3 meetings on the top 3 topics as voted by the community. So today's meeting is focused on climate change and infrastructure vulnerability, because that was the top voted topic from both the survey and the workshop. And the next 2 meetings will focus on education and mental health, respectively. And so we've already, in the assessment, identified a lot of the, ongoing issues and gotten a lot of feedback from the community on their priorities. So the goal for these meetings and the working group is really to drive the next steps. So these meetings, we're going to hopefully talk about ongoing projects, the projects that need to happen next, and like specific goals of how do we get those projects to happen, like what assign people, figure out how to get those projects done, find funding, things like that. So we might be forming like some subgroups out of this working group to help drive forward these different areas of interest, but still have that, interdisciplinary working group to come back to and make sure all these different projects are talking to each other, since everything is so interconnected on Peaks Island. So hopefully one of the goals for today will be to identify some folks that are interested in really driving forward the climate change side of things. So some folks that really want to help find funding and drive these projects forward, maybe just even building more community support for it will be a key thing moving forward. So things like that we'll talk about as we go through the agenda today. Let's see. So so the grant will run through kind of next fall. We'll fund the first 3 meetings, as I mentioned, of this working group, and then we'll also have another public workshop at the end of this, and we'll talk more at some point about what we want that workshop to look like. Like maybe I kind of envision it will be these like subgroups, at least for these first 3 topics, kind of really diving in deeper into project details and like building that community support for those projects and issues and trying to drive them forward. But we can kind of figure out maybe each topic might need something a little different out of that workshop. So we might have to figure that part out a little as we go through this process of what we want that workshop to look like, but just wanted to put that on everyone's radar that we do want to build more public involvement into this project. We're also supposed to build some kind of simple website as part of this grant project to be able to host like all of the documents that have already gone into this assessment work. We're going to put meeting agendas and minutes and recordings there, so everybody, not only on this group, but everyone on the island that's interested can find all of these resources in one place. I was going to open that up for a little bit of a discussion to see if folks have any ideas of an existing website that might be a good place to host a page like that. Or one idea, I was talking with Marianne and a few folks last week about potential website options, and one idea we had that might be simpler is just to set up like a shared Google Drive folder with all of this stuff in it, and we could add subfolders for different topics. So that might honestly be the easiest and best solution. But I'm open to ideas, and maybe first I should take a step back and see if anyone has any questions about this project, why we're here in general, what's going on with this current grant. And Maggie's going to talk a little more about like the climate change issues and kind of that background as well. So, but I'll pause for questions about the project if anyone has it.
I'll just emphasize, I feel like this is really like a bridge grant for us to figure out how to, best set up this group moving forward and make it self-sustaining. So things like the website, it needs to be set up in such a way that it can sustain itself after this grant. So, who's it connected to and who has that responsibility is important.
That's a good point. Yeah, after this grant, we want this group to keep meeting, maybe the frequency of meetings changes, but like we want this to continue on beyond this like initial starter grant. And yeah, for the website, if we did like a Google Drive kind of thing, I was imagining it could be under like a new email setup that like working group members would be able to access and upload things to and be able to share that.
And share ultimately with the community as well.
Exactly, like give the community read access, but then working group members would be able to log in and upload documents. Was my thought.
If it's a Google Drive document, could it be found by Googling it on the internet, or would you have to know about it and have somebody, or could you have a website that gives you the link?
I think you'd need some sort of like web interface to get people there. So that's like our sticking point right now, is that we're not sure where to house anything like this.
It could go multiple places, like it could go, the news has a website that could share the link. Next door is a fabulous resource for a lot of people on Peaks. You know, but that would probably go bigger than Peaks, if that's okay.
Yeah.
How about YouTube?
YouTube?
Yep. I mean, I found a Call Your Bluff series. Are you familiar with those?
I've heard of it, but.
It's the work that's being done on the Diamond Islands.
Yeah.
And it has a very good, and they post their things, and you can find their meetings also on YouTube.
Put all the recordings up.
All
on
the
YouTube.
recording on.
That's a good idea.
They have some very good informative things. On bluff erosion.
Good, yeah, if we did like a Google Drive, we could share that link on multiple other websites, like the Peaks Island Council, put it on their website. Anyone else that has like organizations with a website, we could make sure it's linked so people could find it. Because it seems like there might not be one good entity that has a website that's able to like on-go update this moving forward.
Right, because like Pete doesn't have a website, right?
We have a website, and actually when Mark was here, he really helped us. It had been dormant for quite a while. And he helped us actually set up a new website. And it's actually pretty good. The issue is right now, we don't have anybody on the Pete board that has the skills to, we already have stuff that we need to update and put on there. And Pete, our funds come directly from grants. We don't have membership, so we don't have a lot of money just hanging around. But, I would love to have this stuff connected to the Pete website.
Yeah.
I looked it up today, and hopefully we are gonna have somebody, as long as we have everything written out and give it to somebody, it would be fairly easy for them to just put it on the website.
Okay.
But we need to make sure that we have the person with that skills that can do it.
Okay. It sounds like maybe setting up the Google Drive is a good first step, and then we can share it on a few different websites. To make sure the word gets out.
And maybe YouTube for the recordings.
And yeah, and YouTube for the recordings is a good idea. Okay, great. So that's something I'll put on my to-do list to start setting up, and I'll connect with a few folks or I'll send it out to everybody that's here today so that once the link is set up that you can share it and start getting the materials out to the public. Okay. I think that covers my initial intro. You want to jump into the climate change background stuff?
Yeah, so as Mindy said, the original assessment, so Bill and Patty and Stephen and Tanya came to us with this idea to look at resilience on peaks, but also to think about that more broadly. And so through that assessment, we were kind of looking at the resilience lens, through the resilience lens, but thinking about tourism overuse, thinking about, education and mental health and history and, public infrastructure and finding kind of the nexus of all of these things. And, that led us to a lot of conversations about how, I think the last Peaks plan was that 2003 neighborhood plan that had been done. And so there's just been a lot of change and development on Peaks that hasn't been guided by a common vision. And so part of what came out of that work was this idea to bring everybody together under, a common goal or vision through this project and this working group to try to guide development and guide change and projects and bring everybody in the same room. And as Mindy said, like, the idea is so that, you know, if one group's going out and doing a survey for this or doing marketing, like the other groups know what's happening and there's some coordination among objectives. If there are, for example, like new bathrooms that need to get built, we're thinking about how those could be placed somewhere where they are, you know, protected from storm surge and sea level rise, but maybe they're also part of an initiative to improve, you know, walkability or improve overuse of certain areas of the island. So kind of just like bringing all of these topics together. And as Mindy noted, you know, we did the assessment and then we had this community gathering back in the summer of 2024, where a lot of you helped, and we had all these tables of the different topic areas, and that was really just like, okay, we've kind of laid this groundwork. Where's the community at in thinking about next steps for Peaks? Like, what is Peaks gonna look like in 10 years and 20 years, 30 years? And so people took kind of responsibility for these individual topic tables at that workshop to kind of guide the discussions on that topic. And everybody was, just as a reminder, given like Monopoly money that showed up, and you could kind of put your Monopoly money in the topics that you thought were like of most concern to you. Where do you want to prioritize your time and energy in Peaks? And we do have, coming out of that gathering, we still have a master list of all the individuals who signed up as interested in or wanting to participate in future conversations. And so, you know, as we move forward with this working group, we should be thinking about how we want to market these discussions to the larger group of individuals who specifically signed up under each topic. So for example, you know, we have quite a few people who want to be updated on climate change and infrastructure. And so let's see, so part of what, as Mindy said, you know, climate change and infrastructure resilience came out as a really big concern to participants. And so that's why this first meeting, we're going to focus on that. And then education and mental health also came up as high concerns for participants. So we'll have the next two meetings focused on those topics. And so for as far as today's conversation goes on, you know, how do we as a group come together to form some kind of subgroup structure to guide projects that move forward related to infrastructure resilience, climate change resilience. Part of, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, to guide that conversation, I guess we have put some maps out for you from our original assessment work. And so we had originally mapped the sea level rise scenarios through the state of Maine that are part of the Maine Climate Action Plan. And so those are planning for about 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050, but committed to 1.5 feet by 2050, but above and beyond recommendations to plan for 3.9 feet of sea level rise by 2050. And then there are some targets for 2100 too. So we mapped those sea level rise scenarios, and we also mapped storm surge and flooding projected from potential hurricanes. Hurricanes aren't something that we've seen a ton of in Maine, but it is important to be thinking about them because they can be really destructive. And so I think everybody has like a small map, or not everyone, we put a couple around, and there are actually a few more here that we can pass around if you want to distribute them. So as we're talking today, you can kind of see here, like from both sea level rise and storm surge, where inundation is going to occur. And some of the places that came up through that assessment and mapping work were that whole kind of back shore, seashore Ave area, which unfortunately during the January 2024 storms, after we did this assessment, did get battered pretty hard by those two storms we saw in January. So that whole area, as you can see on the large map of inundated natural resources, like there are a lot of wetlands in that area, which are important for flood storage. But even with all of those wetlands there's still quite a few buildings in that area that are projected to experience inundation under category 1 and 2, which are like milder hurricanes, as well as sea level rise projections. So just to like be thinking of spots that are vulnerable, so that Seashore Ave area, the Trefethen Club would be at risk of inundation in smaller storm situations and sea level or moderate sea level rise scenarios. There's also some risk to the ferry terminal during storms. I think the wastewater treatment plant is just out of the sea level rise flood zones, but also is, potentially at risk during hurricane storm scenarios. So let's see, I know along Centennial Way, that whole area has a handful of buildings that would be inundated during moderate future sea level rise scenarios. And so those are like the key places that came out. So that Seashore Ave, the Trefethen Club, Centennial Way, and the ferry terminal and the wastewater treatment plants, with some of the higher most at-risk areas from the assessment. And so I think as we're thinking today about what's next, we kind of want to be thinking about kind of holistically about where we see the island going and, what these areas are going to look like in the future. Is that good for now?
Great, I think that helps set the stage.
5 minutes over them, so
I think we're doing okay. Unless anyone has any burning questions, we will have some like time for small groups to break out and like discuss priorities more. But if anyone has burning questions, jump in before I jump to the next topic. Okay. What I thought would be helpful next is to talk with everybody about some ongoing or upcoming projects on the island related to climate change and resilience. And so I've lined up a few folks to give some updates, and I'll just go through them as they're on the agenda. So I think, Troy, the first one is you to talk about some FEMA funded rebuilding of Seashore Ave and the back shore of this island.
Yeah, we do. We have some updates, but not extensive. So Public Works did put out an RFP to find consultants and contractors to do the work. So we received 7 or 8 proposals. And so we're currently, the Public Works team is reviewing those. I don't have an ETA when they're going to be finished, but the whole review process is underway. So
What was the work?
it's the FEMA reconstruction of that.
So can you explain what that?
Oh, so yeah, as you know, the road was pretty much washed away during the storm. So the FEMA project is to basically redesign, recreate the road, put it back kind of, fairly close to the way it was. So that's like how the funding works. You get funding to put, recreate this previous condition.
Mhm.
So that's likely, largely what will be in place. There's a small budget for adding some resilience features, so potentially widening culverts to make make water flow better. And again, Public Works will have the different proposals from the different contractors to review, and sure we'll have an opportunity to share them at some point later in the process.
For folks that aren't familiar with FEMA funding, one of the constraints of this is like funding that's specifically given for natural hazard repair work, and it is often kind of like a build back the same funding kind of scheme. So as Troy mentioned, there are some funds for improved resilience, and we've been like chatting about how to incorporate those into the project. But that is one of the issues with waiting, I guess, to do projects under that funding, is that there's not as much flexibility about how things are rebuilt. So they end up kind of being built back the same, and then they're not resilient.
Is it a situation where the proposals you might receive could have like different ways of addressing that little wiggle room for adding some resiliency in? And is that kind of like the deciding factor across the proposals you might receive if everyone else's, if it's like the scope of work for putting it back is going to look the same, but then people might have different.
And probably, I'm not on that's a Public Works project, so I
Okay.
can't speak to all the details, but I think largely probably not so much. I mean, there really isn't a lot of wiggle room there. I mean, so Public Works is taking charge of the design in collaboration with the FEMA project managers. But it's fairly prescriptive, I think. So,
I remember in like a few past conversations we'd had with Public Works crew that they were maybe open to like seeing if there was city funding available to fix some other stuff while FEMA's out there. I won't hold them to this, but just it was like discussed because the cost of getting like contractors and materials out to Peaks is so high that while they're already out here, if they're like, if the culvert widening doesn't happen under the FEMA money, if there was available budget, like potentially they could try to fund some of that while the FEMA project is happening, just to lower the costs of mobilizing materials and contractors out to the island. So that's maybe a possibility. I won't put the city on the hook for it, but I know it's been chatted about.
yeah, I mean, certainly, FB and others and, myself definitely have been, talking with Public Works and, they obviously want to do the best project they can do. And it's, unfortunately, I tried to call, a couple of folks, they're both on vacation today, so I couldn't get that's an update from just today, but, it definitely is in process. And it was nice, they had a lot of, they had 7 or 8 proposals, which is very healthy. So I think that they'll have a good, price is going to be certainly a driving factor. So.
Roy, this is Bill Zimmerman. Is there a time frame that the city can share with this group that can give us an opportunity to make sure that discussions are had about some of the wish list of things that you and others know would be improvements that may not be included in the funding that FEMA's providing? But if there are specific projects that you think would help the resiliency issue, maybe the earlier we know about that, the more likely it is that we could seek funding for that from other sources. And I just wonder if there is a way we can open up the channels of communication on that to make sure that this group or some other, maybe the Peaks Island Council or the Peaks Island Fund, are aware of what the emerging needs of this project are going to be.
Sure, we can certainly, keep the group informed as things move forward. With the proposals just in hand, I don't think there's a timeline for when it will actually happen. It'll probably depend on how quickly they can get the review done and get a contract issued, which can take a little bit of time. So I wasn't able to touch base with them this morning to see if they had an even more current update, but we can keep you in the loop.
Yeah, and the FEMA funds will have some kind of expiration date, so I know they have to do the work. I wanted to say it's by the end of next year, but I don't know if that will actually
The permitting was by the end of the summer. Bill, I can forward you and others the RFP too, so you can see it. One of the things that we've been talking about is, like Mindy said, enlarging some of those culvert crossings that are undersized right now. So when we've been talking about, like, are there opportunities to go after like some of the DOT stream crossing grants or something to fund that upgrade work, but the timing is hard because the FEMA funding's fast, so I don't know that we can turn around the DOT grant that quickly. But there might be some other options, but I would say that those crossing upgrades would be, I think, a pretty high priority.
And to some extent, I think if the culvert is not functional, or, my sense is that would be addressed as part of the project anyway, because they're not gonna leave not a malfunctioning culvert in place during a major project, so.
Yeah, put a bigger one.
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
So can I talk about the culverts? Yeah. As long as we're talking culverts. I think it's not just a question of sizing the culverts, because that one marsh that's down below Bracket Pond, that is now a salt marsh. That has Spartina alterniflora, which gets inundated twice a day, or it doesn't exist.
Right.
So making I mean, it's like, we need a box culvert or a bridge, we can't change the point at which the marsh drains out, the elevation,
Right.
because otherwise it ponds.
Yeah,
You'd have to raise the whole road. I mean, the saltwater's coming in there every day, twice a day, and all the time.
Yeah.
And that's actually a really great thing
Yeah,
in
sure.
terms of salt marsh creation and salt marsh migration. But it's not a question of making a bigger culvert.
right, yeah, no, exactly right. I mean, there's a lot of considerations, so that work would take, important analysis and, ecologists and doing.
Yeah.
Landscape, there's lots to it, so whether or not, to what extent that can be incorporated into a larger project, this is like, again, as they said, kind of timeline may not necessarily fit.
You can cut out areas of the FEMA grant, like literally from here to here.
Yeah, and I'm thinking,
We'll handle
that's
it.
not my sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's either, I think, here's your funding, here's your project, do the project.
so we'd have to take apart.
And then we'd redo the problem.
Maybe-
Yeah, the descriptions are very specific. It's like from this point of the road to this point, like repave. But this is a good segue to the next project on our list, which Pete has a second grant that they received from the Island Institute. Which some of you joined for a walk back in June, I think, or maybe it was April, earlier this year. My timing is screwed up, but we walked around the island with folks from the Island Institute. We had Maine Geological Survey. There was a whole big group looking at the back shore and ways to improve resiliency. I think that was before we knew totally what was going on with the FEMA funding. And so the original intent of that grant was maybe to look at ways to make the backshore more resilient by doing some like living shoreline type of assessments. But since some of that work is going to be incorporated into this FEMA work, or that they're going to be rebuilding, it doesn't really make sense to put out a living shoreline when they're just going to go out and tear up the road next year or whatever. What we were thinking of potentially pivoting that grant to is doing an assessment of the culverts on the island, because Public Works currently doesn't actually know how many culverts are out on the island, what their condition is. So it's really hard to plan for future resilience when we don't even know where they all are, or what size they are, what condition they're in. So I don't know if Abby has an update on that one at all, but since we're changing the scope of that grant, we have to get it approved through the Island Institute to make sure it still lines up with their funding goals and everything. But that's kind of what we had chatted about, potentially shifting that grant to.
I will just chime in and say the Institute wants to support what Pete is interested in doing. We know with the FEMA funding shift that the original project didn't seem feasible. So I look to this group in terms of what makes sense and how to use the funds. I'm here to talk to anyone on Pete. I don't know if we have time today. Could talk today, but just communicating to the group, we are in support of the project that makes the most sense to you all, and we'll kind of follow your lead.
Awesome, thanks, Abby. Yes, I guess Marianne and Kim, and we can talk more about and Troy too, because I know you've been helping get that shepherded along. That still makes the most sense for that grant. I think it would be really beneficial for the island and the city to both have that information for future planning efforts. Okay, anyone have any other questions on those two before I move to the next project? The next one, and I think this one is from you, talking about inland flooding and how that exacerbates coastal flooding and sea level rise, which I think we were just kind of getting into as well. So trying to figure out, I think that's one where we don't necessarily have an ongoing project for that, but it is, been an issue that has been ongoing, and trying to figure out how to tackle both the coastal sea level rise, but also the flooding from all these strong storms coming from inland.
Yeah, I live out on the back shore in Kathy Henley and Will Winkleman's old cottage, back to their property. And during those big storms, I was watching the marshes fill up because sea level high tide was across the road. But it wasn't, the ocean water was not what was creeping up to the floor of the cottage I was in, it was, the marsh couldn't drain, which gets back to the culvert issue. But I think starting at the beaver ponds, there's this whole system that's kind of haphazard, what the military did, what the beavers are doing, what's happened with the odd construction project. And if, just from my professional point of view, it would be really helpful, I think, to take a look at, could we do some storage of water during storms in those series of essentially terraced ponds that are coming down into not just the Battery Steel Marsh, but also that marsh I mentioned earlier, over below Brackett Pond. But other places on the island, I think, would also be something to look at in terms of controlling flooding in a more holistic way, because certainly the sea level rise is going to be an issue. And a couple of the houses that got really badly flooded, they weren't flooded with salt water. That was, you know, the marsh was full of fresh water coming. So that's why I wanted to add that. I think it's an important aspect for the mapping as it goes.
Yeah, and maybe this is something folks can talk about more when we like break out into some small groups to talk about next steps and projects to keep working on, like thinking how, like what actually needs to happen to kind of address those inland flooding issues.
On that note, actually, we are working, our office is working with Tracy Summers and the Great Diamond Island folks on potentially, we're trying to host a workshop similar to what happened on Great Diamond earlier this year, but focused on upland management of how do you manage land up above the shore to mitigate some of the erosion and flooding issues. So keep you posted. I can keep the group posted about that as we go forward. Hopefully we were invited to submit a grant by Castaway Tree Partnership. So that's submitted, and hopefully any Castaway Island is invited to participate in it. So
well, that would be great. Makes sense to send a few folks there to share the knowledge. Great, and that kind of also ties into the Main Islands project, I think, as well, that Abby and her crew are working on. If you want to share an update on that, Abby.
I would love to. Would it be possible to share my screen? I promise I won't take a ton of time. I just thought it would be easier if I could do this in presentation form to keep me on time.
Absolutely.
Super.
Should be able to now. Let me know if.
All signs point to it should be coming up now. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Hi, everyone. As I introduce myself, my name is Abby Roach. I work in the Center for Climate and Community at Island Institute, and I am co-leading a project called Main Islands Project with a collaborator named Gabe McPhail, who works on resilience planning throughout the state. I wanted to talk a little bit today about the Main Islands Project. It is an ongoing project that supports all 15 year-round unabridged island communities. To date, we have been in touch with Troy from the city of Portland for the city's collaboration on this project, and we have met with the Peaks Island Council in the spring, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But wanted to bring up the project here and now to give your group an understanding of the resources that are available through Main Island Project and what we can offer as you all go forward with the work you're doing. So our high-level goal of this project is to support island communities by identifying and or visualizing resilience planning gaps to create a clear picture of vulnerabilities across people and place and connecting them to resources needed to sustain year-round life. We know that Peaks Island is in a different place than some of the other island communities we're working with. Because you all have done your assessment work, that does put you in a very different place than most of the islands we're working with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we imagine we can support Peaks Island in a little bit different of a way, and kind of what resources we have available. So really quickly up top, just letting everyone know when we're talking about resilience and thinking about resilience and vulnerabilities together, we're thinking about it through the lens of the livability and viability of both people and place. listening to this group talk about how you're thinking about resilience, there seems to be a lot of overlaps. So we aren't just thinking about climate impacts only on roads, but we're also trying to think about housing, healthcare, education. And that's just really the lens we're bringing to this work. So you're probably wondering, how does it work? What is this project? I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, but just so you know, we do have 2 separate funding sources for this project, which may be of interest. One funding source is a state grant through the CRP, and the other is a FEMA BRIC grant, which I won't say more than it has been an interesting journey to get those funds. But we're in the first phase right now, and this first phase is to support communities in conducting a high-level vulnerability assessment. Importantly, we are only using existing data, and so for Peaks Island, that means we are using the assessment that's already been provided, with the intention of taking that information and creating an island-specific digital map to document local resilience. And so essentially what we will make available to the community is a data set on several different resilience indicators. We aren't collecting new data again, but putting that into an online map format. We are subcontracting with FBE across all of the Casco Bay Islands to do this work, and we're creating each of those for each island community. Our intention with those maps is that it allows community members to see where work has been done, and also identify any data gaps. So again, because we're only working with existing data, if data has not been collected in an area, it will just read as a gap. I mentioned FEMA BRIC. FEMA BRIC is a project that is related to building resilient infrastructure in communities. This grant is one that we're working through the City of Portland for any work that'll be done in any of the Portland Islands. And we are continuing to figure out how those funds are available to us. But high level, when those funds are available, the idea is that we have some funding to provide to each community where you could get some technical assistance from an engineer or from someone of your choosing to do some early project planning in an area related to wildfire, water, so essentially water consumption, transportation access as related to sea level rise concerns, or wildfire. So those are the areas. High level timeline, as I mentioned, this spring or early summer, we met with the Peaks Island Council, and what we heard from the Peaks Island Council is, you guys should really get connected with the group if they get funded for the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership Grant. So here we are. We are currently collecting the data for that online map right now, and we will be in touch in the winter, likely in January or February, with the data we have collected. And then we are hoping that our FEMA BRIC funding begins in winter 2026. All information about that phase of the project will come through us and with the City of Portland, with Troy, as we figure out what that actually looks like on the ground. So less info on that last piece. And our funding does carry us through 2027, especially for that BRIC funding piece. So I will end there. I know that's a lot of information. I can follow up with additional information and also be available for any future meetings or other conversations if anyone wants to learn more about the project.
Thank you, Abby. That was so helpful. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, quick question for islands that are not technically part of Portland but are neighboring islands. Is this being done? Sorry if I missed it. Is it being done across all Casco Bay Islands, but just the ones that are technically part of Portland? You're working with the city, but you're working directly with, like, Long Island, for example, or.
Sure. Great question. So this is available to all 15 year-round island communities. So that does include the City of Portland Islands, but also Long, Shabig, Isla Ho, going up the coast, are also receiving this support.
Abby, can
Is
you
that, but the brick funding is just for the Portland ones, is that right? So the
That-
CRP funding is for the other ones?
No, so the brick funding goes across all of the island communities as well. I was just kind of getting at, we are still, there's been a lot of conflicting information from the federal government and getting those funds out. And so once we do get a better sense of the timeline on those funds, we will coordinate with Troy's office and kind of get you all the information on what the next steps are there.
Abby, can you just talk a little bit about the scale, the scope of budget? 'Cause
That's what I was.
That's I think it's important for everyone to understand how much we're talking about here, so.
Totally. Yep. So it's pretty small. We are still figuring that out with the FEMA folks. There have been some changes in the budget with the change in administration at the federal level. But you can expect approximately $5,000 to $7,000 per community. So it's not a ton of money, but our hope is to use that strategically with communities to use it in a way to hopefully bolster an existing project, for example. But great question, Troy. Thank you. The scope is really important. It's not a ton of money for technical assistance, but our hope is to get that money to communities in somewhat of a helpful way.
Yeah, so that might be a good thing to keep in mind when we kind of break out and talk about next steps and priorities, thinking about if the timeline for any projects that we want to get going on soon might line up with the technical assistance that they'll have available through this BRIC grant, maybe next spring or something, depending on when the government comes together and gets the funding out.
I wonder, Abby, and I know we're kind of involved, but if that online mapper has if there's any way to connect it to the, like this group or the Google Drive we were talking about earlier, or link from it. Like,
Yeah.
are you going to be the hosts of that mapper for like?
We will be the hosts of it and putting in data, but I think that's a really great question that gets at kind of the next steps, which is in January or February, our hope is that we could come back to this group to seek feedback about that map, about what we have so far, and get feedback from you all. And we are able to customize components of it. I don't know if that answers your question, Maggie.
Yeah, so there might be a point then that like we could say, oh, it makes sense to incorporate the work this group is doing in this way or something in January.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And over time too, we're hopeful that those maps can be something that's useful for the community. So, as we talk in January or February, if there's another use for them that could be useful for this group, let's talk about it. We're just very much in the trying to get all the information together phase, but in early 2026, we'll be in the phase where we can seek feedback and show you something a little bit more tangible.
Feels like maybe some funding for like some website work would be helpful for Peaks. I'm just thinking about like having that map in a place where people from the island can get to it to see it. So a nice digital representation.
That's such a good point. Yeah, the hope would be that although we host it, that it's available for others to essentially have links to or be able to feature on their own websites, certainly.
Usually you can like embed a map on other websites, so we can try to figure out how to help folks get it on other community websites so that it's kind of shared broadly.
Definitely. Great point.
All right. Yeah, I'll jump to the next project, which is also with the Island Institute. I don't know if Emma, if you're going to lead the description of this, but they're working on some other nature-based solutions work, which is really tied into this and has some other technical assistance opportunities that are pretty exciting.
Sure, I will frame this up and then I won't talk for long. Emma is the real expert here. But Island Institute received funding in the spring of 2025 through a Casco Bay Estuary Partnership grant to support Casco Bay Islands in getting more information and education on nature-based strategies. And we also received funding through that grant for travel for Emma, who is a Shore Corps steward, who is funded through the Maine Conservation Corps to support communities in assessing sites for erosion needs and using a state tool. So the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Emma is we have an opportunity for Peaks Island to utilize Emma's expertise and her time before her stewardship ends in May to come out to the island and conduct up to 5 site assessments at places where erosion is a concern. And so Emma can provide some more details and some examples from the work we've done on Shabig, which has been our pilot site. So Emma, over to you.
It's Abby. Yeah, so I am, as Abby said, I am in the Shore Corps position until May. It's a 1-year position aiming to connect some state resources, which are part of a new program called Our Shore, focusing on nature-based and hybrid strategies for coastal resilience and erosion management. And that position in Casco Bay is going to look like conducting site assessments for the Casco Bay Islands, and then providing some high-level recommendations for nature-based strategies that align with the state framework and could be considered for those sites. So as Abby said, in November, we were able to do our first round of site visits on Shabig Island. And so over 2 days, we visited 5 coastal sites that the community had identified as areas of concern. 3 of those were municipally owned sites for shoreline access, and then 2 were private properties. And so those site visits took place with different community members. We had members of the select board in attendance, the local code enforcement officer, and then local volunteers involved in coastal resilience efforts. And over the winter, we'll be putting together reports on those site visits and returning to Shabig in the spring to share what we saw and some different recommendations and nature-based strategies that would work well for those sites. And the idea with the site visits is to provide direct, actionable feedback for those 5 sites, but also to help the community as a whole start thinking about this new state framework and how those ideas might be applied to other sites on the island. So what that will look like for Peaks, the connection here is that in the spring, once it warms up a little bit, we will be coming to Peaks Island to conduct 5 site visits as well. And likely in the February-March timeframe, we'll be looking to finalize those 5 sites and would love feedback from this group in particular about what sites are community priorities in terms of erosion concerns.
Emma, yes, I feel like this is a really good project with opportunities for next steps and collaboration on trying to figure out what those priority sites might be. And it's nice that there's a mix of public and private opportunities, because I know that's been a concern from folks, like feedback we've gotten at the workshop and in the survey, like, you know, there's the public infrastructure concerns, but also private, understandably. So, I don't know if any folks have initial ideas now that they want to chat about for, you know, key locations that those site visits might need to take place at, or, you know, that's something we can also brainstorm later. Sounds like we have some time to figure those out in collaboration with Emma and Abby.
Yes, Emma will be in touch in as she mentioned, in 2026. And our hope is that we can be in touch with this group to help us identify where those sites will be. She will provide more information in a written form to help you make that decision in early 2026, so that we will take on the next step, which is getting back in touch with you all. But that would really, if we think about this in next steps, that would be what it would look like.
I don't want to open a can of worms here, but has any discussion already taken place with TEIA on their project? Because I know there are some differences of opinion on the way to make changes there, so that there's a combination of as much nature-based resiliency as possible. along with some of the practical issues that they're facing with raising that building. That would be the most immediate project I can think of for Peaks Island, but has that already taken place?
On our end, no, we have not been in contact with anybody on Peaks Island from TEIA. I heard a little bit of the backstory on that from you, Bill, a couple weeks ago. I think with this large of, it sounds like it's an infrastructure project and a pretty large one by that. A little bit outside of the scope for Emma's area of expertise and her training. I do think we can get creative though if anyone from TEIA might be interested in learning more about MBS and joining on one of the site visits or talking with Emma. That could certainly be something that I think could make sense. Just what I heard about the project before seems like it's a project in which engineers are working on that larger scale. But I do think that there's always an opportunity through Emma's work to let people know more about nature-based strategies and talk to someone directly who has that expertise about some options. So that could be something the group could consider. That's certainly something that we've tried to do on Shebig. Key community leaders coming on the site visits, engaging with Emma to learn more about NBS or nature-based strategies.
What are they doing, Bill, and where are they at in the process?
Well, I'm not in a position to give you details on that simply because I don't know. But my understanding was that there was some willingness to look at nature-based strategies, but there were some limitations on how far they could take that because of the actual threat of rising waters and flooding that's already occurred that has threatened the building. So they are having to raise the building and in the process do some engineering that would not necessarily be considered nature-based. That's my understanding. So but it sounds like it's going to have to be sort of a compromise between the two types of remediation. That's a weak explanation.
I feel, that happens a lot. And I feel like there are some engineers who are really good at working in that space now. Like there are some firms that are pretty skilled at kind of mixing those strategies and figuring out where they're appropriate, depending on the direction of the winds and all that. So it'd be worth trying to like connect. We work with a lot of engineers who are more progressive in the ways that they think about the built infrastructure, and be worth trying to like bring some of those names forward maybe.
Yeah. Well, I can share the people who are the names of the people who are closer to the project. I think the danger here is having one side or the other say it's my way or the highway, and recognize that there will have to be some compromise. So I can get names to you of people to speak with if you want.
Yeah, if just to get a sense of scale of projects that Emma would be working on, is it things like access to Centennial Beach or Sandy Beach, that kind of, pathways eroding, lots of parking? Is that the scale you're talking about, Abby and Emma?
I'm not sure that I'm familiar with those particular sites. It sounds like that would fall within the scale.
It's kind of a pathway down to the beach that a lot of people use. It's a heavily used site, not particularly big. It's not a major site. There aren't buildings there. But I think if the group is going to try to figure out what sites make sense, we probably need an example of what you would look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So that would certainly be an option, a site similar to that. I heard a couple of things. I heard you mention that it's a frequently used public site, which is definitely something that we are looking for, areas that are visible to community members. The other thing that you mentioned is that it doesn't have buildings on it, and I do want to be clear that a site with infrastructure or with buildings on the property is not immediately excluded. Some of the visits that we did on Shebag were on private properties with homes, on the waterfront. So that is possible. We would be looking for sites where there hasn't been a contractor or an engineer already pulled in to design the project, ideally. And as far as just like scale of the parcel, typically up to about 100 linear feet of shoreline is what the site visits involve, but that can be a little bit flexible.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I guess, yeah, that'll be something to keep thinking about, and I guess the next part of our meeting will be to kind of break out and discuss a little more, so we might generate some more ideas that way instead of with the big group.
One thing I was just thinking about is like, when Emma's out doing those, is that an opportunity to collaborate with the education folks in their work?
I've been thinking that all of these examples are things that like are such good learning opportunities and can be sort of for children of all different ages, like whether they're our own elementary school or we bring USM students. I mean, this is like what the world is right now and what a relevant, amazing project to involve students. And I don't know exactly how we do that, but
Be fun, yeah, when Emma's out there to have someone.
Yeah.
Students.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great example, and I think that was Jean saying that the example of the elementary school and the Daisy Braun project from this fall is also a good example of ways to engage these environmental issues with the school and educational opportunities.
as Bill mentions, the Peaks Island Fund funded this island as a classroom.
Right.
For elementary school, really trying to bring learning into the real world and to really understand our island is a unique ecosystem, and why can't we build curriculum and learning around that? So like, I think these are some great opportunities, but it's not easy because these are our younger children, so we kind of think how to make it accessible.
Yeah.
But this is exactly why this group needs to be meeting, so that when we hear about a study being done by one segment of the group, we recognize the opportunities in others and bring in groups like the Peaks Island Fund to help fund what you're talking about, Jean. I think it's a really good suggestion.
Yeah, it's like maybe if the kids didn't go to every site, but they went to the beach access site, that's like an easy public spot and probably more accessible.
And then we're kind of ultimately, we are positioned on Peaks Island in our school to really share a lot with the greater Portland community. To have an easy access to sort of the habitat and the problems that this island experiences is a great resource. And so how can we even maybe make it bigger for those kids out of Talbot School that, 95% who've never been on the ferry and never even, so that's another piece to sort of have behind here.
One other thing, and then I'm going to have to leave, but you might look at the CMP property on Centennial Beach when Emma comes to the island. I think the future of Centennial Beach and using Centennial Beach to tie TEIA into the elementary school and other recreational activities on the island may one day finally touch the CMP building, where we've talked about a community center, a swimming pool, and all kinds of things for maybe 100 years now. It's been a long time conversation. But if she's looking at projects, that's one where it might be helpful to have her opinions.
Thank you, Bill. I'm making a note of that one.
But yeah, and it sounds like it'll make sense to keep the group in the loop. Yeah, the flooding areas. Yeah, and I think inland flooding isn't necessarily excluded from what Emma's doing if there's like nature-based solutions that are applicable.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure who said that, but that's a great point. Inland flooding considerations and inland erosion as well do fall within the scope of my work. So those are also sites that could be considered.
I think those were all the projects that folks had like shared with me that they wanted to talk about on the agenda. We are close to the time we had allotted for this part, so maybe if folks have other things, we can chunk them in at the end. But I thought maybe it would be helpful just to run through like quick next steps on each of these projects, just to like summarize kind of what we all just talked about with all these different projects. So like the FEMA work is in the hands of the Portland Public Works right now. They're reviewing the proposals. They'll let us know kind of next steps once they've decided a path forward with the selected engineer. So we'll keep in touch with them to see what mitigation opportunities there might be there. The Shore Up Grant, Pete and the city and the Island Institute and us will collaborate to maybe try to get that culvert assessment underway, maybe in the spring at this point, since there's already a good chunk of snow on the ground. So we'll touch base to see what needs to happen to get that up and rolling. The inland flooding piece sounds like that's something we'll need to talk about more to figure out concrete next steps, noting that that's an issue exacerbating the coastal flooding and sea level rise issues. Main Islands project, Abby and her crew will be in touch in 2026 on next steps there. Once the funding piece comes through and when they have that draft map available for some feedback. And then Emma's gonna touch base as well in early 2026 for site visit opportunities for nature-based solutions. Okay. So we thought instead of sitting in the big group that it might be helpful to kind of break up into a few small groups to really dig into like the meat of what are we gonna do next with, you know, maybe some of the projects we've talked about or other priorities that maybe we haven't talked about yet today. So we've got a few handouts that I'll pass around. Some is like a summary of some feedback from the survey and the workshop, just if folks want to reference what other people on the island have been saying are priorities when you're thinking about this. We also have a handout that's got some different upcoming grant opportunities that might be applicable to thinking about like next step projects. Yeah, that'd be great. So what we're thinking about is like in these small groups, folks can brainstorm like, okay, what do we think are the next projects that the climate change subgroup should really start digging their heels into? Like we want to have some concrete action items out of this meeting so that we can keep these things moving forward and they don't just sit. No, I think it's like a there's like a couple per small group, sorry.
That's my
I
fault.
wasn't sure how many people were coming, so I thought it would just be easier to have both share. But I can send you all these documents after if you're interested in having a copy of them. But yeah, so thinking through next step projects, maybe what funding sources could apply to them, and also when you're thinking about funding sources, like who could be the fiscal entity to apply for those funds. In some cases, it might be the city of Portland might have to be the applicant. In some cases, we might need an island nonprofit to have the capacities to fund that, or to be the fiscal sponsor at the very least. You know, you might hire somebody to manage the project, but a nonprofit might have to be the pass-through for funding and everything. So thinking about what groups might have capacity and like the setup to be able to host something like that will be really helpful. Okay, thank you all. I saw Abby just sent a message saying that they have to run. But thank you so much for the updates. It was very helpful, and sounds like we'll be in touch a lot in the new year.
Thank you, everyone. I wish I could have been there in person. Really good to see familiar faces, and great meeting Mindy and Maggie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Happy
everyone.
holidays. Bye. Bryn, you're welcome to stay on. We can put you into one of the small groups, but I know you mentioned you might have to go early too, but you're muted. We can't hear you right now, but
No, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I do have to duck out a little bit early, but I'm happy to join a group. It's been really enjoyable and illuminating listening. So,
okay, great. I'll toss you into group, but if you have to duck out early, no worries.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it might make sense to just like kind of work at like the tables you're in, or we could like rearrange slightly to like 3 or 4 groups, I think would work well with how many people.
Yeah,
you
I
have
would
here.
love to talk with somebody about the inland water time stuff, because most of that is on the land preserve land.
Yeah, so maybe you and Ann need to connect, 'cause I know that's your passion. Or any other folks. Yeah, we could form slightly themed groups if that is appealing to folks, if they have a certain area that they wanna dig into more. 46 people.
I'm curious, because I have one question. So you're talking about having 2 other big meetings besides that, one focused on mental health and one focused on education. Is that the other? How are the people gonna differ sitting around the table for that?
At the different meetings.
Yeah.
At the education and
Yeah.
mental health. Good question, yeah. It could be the same people, so we'll have the same core working group that the first group of people that I introduced. All these meetings are open to the public, and we'll try to, specifically reach out to folks that we think would be interested in the topics at hand, but also, share it.
Okay, so there is gonna be different key players at different meetings.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
I think one thing that is important actually coming out of this meeting, that kind of touched on the beginning, is, we got this like small seed grant to get this group started. So like, what is the most effective way to make this happen so that it actually happens, and I think we don't want to have too many meetings because then it's gonna be too much. So we have 4 under the initial grant, and then through this process, we have to kind of establish what this is gonna look like moving forward so that it can continue to operate. And, I think Laura, right, is gonna be the liaison for the Peaks Island Council, which is a really important piece, and thinking about how that relationship is gonna look. Like, we don't necessarily have this all ironed out. This is kind of our first time coming together. So I feel like that's a really relevant and good question that we should be thinking about, and we can talk about via email, or we can talk about right now, like, like there's a lot of things going on for climate change. We have this one meeting to kind of get an update on it. Is there a small group of people here who's willing to kind of take that torch and be the people to check in, with Troy on the city project and the Island Institute? And because I wrote down like, there's already some money on the table that this group can kind of inform how it's spent, which is, I didn't realize that they had like 5,000 to 7,000 for engineering design. And so it'd be really nice if the priorities for that funding came out of this group. So it does feel like finding a way to leave this meeting or follow up after this meeting with like a small group who's excited about this topic and has energy and willingness to, lead some initiatives forward.
I was gonna also mention, something that I think is maybe a thread between these 3 topics is, I've been talking with some parents at the school and the school administration and the city about, some like school playground redesign updates, ideas, just kind of getting the ball rolling on what could be possible. And then in conversations with community members, Marianne saying one, kind of broadening the scope of that into maybe a look at kind of all of the community recreational spaces on the island and kind of what purpose each of them serve, so that rather than looking at things in isolation, like the playground, understanding what's available at this space, what's available at Trot Little John, we have this new equipment up there, there's other, I know Friends of Trot Little John has other ideas of what could happen. What about the ball field? And those are like, you know, spaces that there is already some collaboration between like the city and the community. But I think for fear of things feeling too siloed or like a separate conversation, I think that does connect to the question of resources for the community and where are they going? What purpose do these different areas serve? Talking about like, I think what Phil brought up about Centennial and TEIA and then the CFP building there and that kind of being these sort of like untapped, maybe potential futures, communities, spaces in some capacity. I would hate for any of that kind of planning or these conversations that I'm having to not fit into the broader scope of, you know, thinking about resiliency, thinking about the climate piece, and they also really relate to mental health and giving people opportunities to connect and be in community and share space and use space and what pieces of the population are being served by things that are currently available and what could we add to include more people in that. And then also the educational piece, what are the opportunities for like our young people on the island to engage in the play that is, you know, formative for their own educational experiences. And so we had kind of landed on, okay, let's apply maybe through the school or maybe through another entity to the Peaks Island Fund for a grant to at least talk about like a design plan. And this started as like a playground design plan, and then maybe kind of getting reframed as, oh, should it be a like recreation spaces design plan so that everything is working in tandem and we're not just thinking, even with the playground in mind, we're like, we don't want to just, there's ways that we could add a piece of equipment, you know, in a month if we had the funds and whatever, but we don't want to just throw things at the wall. We want things to work together. So I think that is a piece where across these different working groups and conversations, I just want to make sure that we're not just kind of barreling forward, but like, yeah. And yeah, so I also would love, I mean, I'm not like, I'm sort of one of a group of people that are talking about this, but would love for anyone with kind of ideas or ways that we can collaborate across these topics, because I feel like they're very connected by also this kind of ongoing conversation I'm having with parents and the principal and the parks folks in the city as well.
Very
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we want to do with this.
Yeah.
There was a recent write-up in the Portland Press on the playground redesign in Brunswick. That's like a nature-based playground.
Yeah. So I think there's elements of that, I think, and you know, I feel like the kids here are already, you know, they love just digging around in the dirt. But it'd be good to give them, you know, opportunities for, outdoor classroom spaces. Huge piece of it, yes.
Also, you know, we get like, so, I mean, and I don't talk about this, we get, you know, the city will come in and do some work at the school and do some plantings.
Yeah.
And then the plantings aren't watered, like there's just, everything kind of happens kind of sort of haphazardly, so I love the idea of a more master plan. I also love that, you know, then the kids, they put these beautiful little plants that could grow, some, you know, native species that are, you know, grow into, and then they're dug up by kids because they're in the wrong space for a long time, and kids are just digging and
Yeah. Or like there's,
because we don't know that nobody's like really educated,
Yes.
so we need that bigger.
and it needs, and how do we have longevity with that in any of these projects where I think something that happens in general in life is like a motivated person or a few people make something happen and then at some point maybe become unavailable to sustain it, and then you know, but not everything needs to be like, you know, bureaucratic necessarily, but like there's a bunch of wood in the middle of the playground because there was a chicken coop at one point and now it's not there and, you know.
Like a death trap.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you, what, you said you've been talking to city, Parks and Rec, like, is there an opportunity for them to include that in their budget? Or,
I think Peaks Playground in particular is slated for a capital improvement in 2035. But I was told essentially that, money talks, if you will. So, if we have, basically the best thing we can do is come to them with a plan. And then I think the strategy that the parents had suggested that I've been talking to is like, let's fundraise from the community and especially like the summer community around a plan. And if we've got the funds, then that moves us way up in the kind of timeline of city projects. And also we can be, if we have a comprehensive plan, but we are okay with things happening piecemeal, like it doesn't need to all happen at once. It could be like, as there's capacity, let's add a tire swing. But it's not just kind of like dumped somewhere. And as there's capacity, like perhaps there's a better bathroom at the ball field and yeah, which is like connected in ways I didn't understand to like the issue on the back shore because people have been wanting to do a bathroom there, but you can't put a permanent structure there. And so then there's money for a bathroom maybe, but it can't go where it was originally, you know, so all these things that I'm learning that I just totally am like, I have no knowledge, so I'm wanting to like brain dump this here so that hopefully people who know more than me can help.
Can I just pile on to that a little bit?
Yes, I like being this big group.
I'm an educator of much older graduate school, and I think some of the earlier conversations around bringing in students of all different levels into these projects we're talking about, whether it's Emma or whether, you know, something bigger happens. And my students really need something to hang on to be hopeful. And one of the things that's hopeful is doing stuff.
Yes.
Like being part of it. So I think
Right, so we
it's
have Jeff,
very
mental
important
health.
to, for climate change related anxiety, which we're all feeling.
Yeah.
You know, to make sure that that door is open.
Yes.
About
Yes.
saying, we're doing this project and, you know, we need volunteers to come out on Saturday to plant eelgrass or whatever it is,
Yes.
but it not leaving it to
Yeah.
the contractor.
Right.
I so appreciate you saying that. I know you weren't just like saying it to me, but I.
No, but
But I think like
they are connected.
in general, and one of my questions to the city, which, and I am a city employee, but I was asking them, I was like, what is the jurisdiction of like, this needs to be done by so-and-so, or like, can we do a community call to be like, hey, can somebody who wants this lumber come and take up the old chicken coop? And, you know, and so I just think in general, like, there's so much existential dread amongst all ages, like the little ones feel it too, they're very aware, and I think engaging in these community projects is so good for that feeling of like doing something. And I love and it doesn't have to be limited to just folks on the island. I think if we're doing something and you have students who come out and
I'd have to call them up from Rhode Island, but.
Yeah.
Right, but I think we could, but there needs to be somebody to kind of market these out at UNE and look at like the different schools in the US and go ahead.
Well, just sort of going off of that, you know, we're sort of talking at a couple of different scales. We're talking, you know, like about culverts or playground equipment. But then there's sort of like, this climate change thing is so big, you know, what's happening in 50 years? And I sort of want to take all the little projects and put it on a big map, and then sort of start taking some of the maps that we've done through the assessment and looking at the different shore types. You know, is it sandy or is it rocky? What areas are really susceptible to erosion? And I sort of put everything together. And I look at the grants and these things, and these are all very specific to certain types of things. And it'd be kind of nice to have like a big map that has what the needs are, sort of short term, medium and long term, and then be able to identify from that. So I'm kind of sort of going from what size culvert to, is that really gonna, how is that gonna help when the water is 3 feet tall or 3 feet higher? I kind of wanna, have, and then once we have that big picture, then I think we can start working toward it, and that'll help us prioritize.
So funny you should mention that. We actually are launching a project and as early as possible in 2026 to do exactly that, a detailed shoreline inventory. We're gonna look at what type of shore is it? Is it natural? Is it constructed? What conditions it in? We'll document it with photographs, some drone flights, LiDAR imagery. And it's gonna be actually all shoreline from the Falmouth town line to the Cape Elizabeth town line, including all of the Casper Island. So that'll be available for the end of 2026. And it'll be really detailed.
And are you including all of Falmouth, like from the top?
No, none of Falmouth.
None of
so
Falmouth, starting at Falmouth, but going through SoPo,
all the way to,
all the way to the start of Cape.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's past. So it's
But all,
Portland,
including all the Casper.
Yeah.
Well,
shoreline, the island shoreline compared to the, do you have like a percentage?
I don't know. Well, I guess we'll know. when we-
5 miles, right?
Yeah,
And,
something like that, but yeah.
I'm just curious, because we're probably at, we took the islands collectively in Casco Bay, they're down to.
Yeah, actually, I guess we'll know for sure after that.
Okay, yes, thanks.
One of the things I was thinking about, like, I don't know if, I feel like open space plans are listed in the Community Resilience Partnership grants. So, like, I'm thinking like open space plan or rec plan, and wouldn't it be cool if it had like a student design piece, whether it's like students from RISD that provide landscape design, or, it's like signage that the Peaks Island Elementary students make that partner with the site that Emma's working on, that's like, here's what it means when they make the art. That could be a good option, like, just something to think about, because you'll probably be the the island can't apply on their own, it would have to be as a member of the city, but getting something like that funded might be a really nice, like, kind of visioning thing.
Yeah, but there's also a piece of like, there's like this map, then there's this FEMA brick. Is that the same thing or the other map, or is that different?
The one that's coming.
Yeah, that map.
It'll
There's
like
also
like
map.
this.
Yeah, resilience,
and then-
yeah, there's a few, and then but I do think there's also some piece of it where it's like. The kind of like, these people are doing kind of this map, and these people are doing this map, and then it's like, how do we get like. Something that has everything, and technologically speaking, it's certainly possible, but I think it's also just a question of like. How, like, thinking in this like holistic way, even though these projects get very, very specific, and then how do we visualize the sum of the parts kind of, I don't know. Yeah, I like what you were saying about like, yeah, like all of how everything is like working together, from the big scale, like what's going on with like the vulnerability on the shoreline to like, yeah, how is this like one marsh functioning versus like, yeah.
Like, basically taking that vulnerability map that Island Institute's making, and then being able to add pinpoints for like projects that are ongoing, or.
Sounds
Sort
like
of
there might be
and time scales.
flexibility to do that. Yeah, the timescale piece, we'd have to think of how to add that.
Yeah.
But it's definitely possible. That is like, when you put down a point or something, you see.
Mary Ann, from Pete's perspective, do you have a hit list of things that as Pete are the action items, whether they came out of a user assessment or individuals' knowledge of the island? Does Pete maintain that sort of list of?
No, we haven't, we were much more active before COVID, and when COVID hit. Pete kind of fell apart, and the only reason we're really back together and doing stuff is because of Trap Little John and because of these grants. So I think once all this stuff gets going, we might have more of what you're asking for and be more invigorated to do that stuff.
It just seemed to be an extension, Marion, of this conversation about big picture, little picture,
Yeah.
granular lean in.
And then also the built environment, our school, I have to make, we were talking about sustainability on Peaks Island, our school is a travesty. Our school, our school is functioning with a 1950s heating system. We burn 20,000 gallons of fuel a year. If we looked at the per student amount of fuel in all of the district, I'm sure we win or lose, but it will probably be better. Our air quality in the building is terrible. I would bet it's a sick building in many ways. It's a lovely building. I love working there, so I don't want to make it like room. It's a beautiful staff. It's beautiful. There's wonderful stuff, but we haven't had any money poured into that school in terms of upgrades in a long time it's tricky. We talked about like the heat pumps in that school, how could build our heating system, our heat's so hot in some of the rooms that all winter long, like on a day like today, they get 2 degrees real field temperature, 2 degrees, windows are wide open because you just can't control it. You can't control it. And then, there's other rooms that are freezing, but it just, so that's another piece of this whole climate, question is, how can we make our island a model for a built environment that, that's what it does, what it should, and it's.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about like green infrastructure, like the buildings themselves as also a priority for making those more resilient.
What would it take to put the Peaks Island School on the cities?
Well, I think we are in the cities. I can, they did an assessment, and I think they're doing another assessment. With me, where they evaluated all the buildings, and I think like we would be sort of the next, but I think we're still years and years away. But I also think that we have tremendous fundraising potential on this island to work both with private and, city funds and bonds or whatever. So I think that, the right person leading an initiative at that school could move things forward much more rapidly than they would happen if we let it go to when they get to us.
It's very similar to the playground piece where, and that would be a Portland Public Schools, not City of Portland conversation. I believe, and so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the City of Portland is the playground,
Right.
The school yard and school building. Don't ask me what the difference between the schoolyard and playground is. No, they can't even tell me. Is the Portland Public Schools, the fence around it, however, is the city. So, but the building itself is Portland Public Schools, but I think I would guess similar to my conversation with the city about the playground, if whenever the pie docket for improvement could probably shift depending on community fundraising. But I think again, it's very similar where a holistic plan that maybe elements could be done over time. I think that fits into this whole conversation as well. If we're gonna do an outdoor classroom, why not? It's like, why wouldn't we say?
Guys, I want to shift this because my only real question that I came here with, was about the road on the back shore. And if there's any, I understand that FEMA wants it rebuilt as it was. But, I also question, like, why can't we open up one of those marshes? Why do we need a road that goes around the building? The marsh that comes down in front of the battery, like, why do we need that road there?
Well, then we would need a bridge, right?
No, there's no
Or just-
houses there, so they would just
cut
pass
it
it
open?
by going through the back road.
Fine.
I wonder, when you say that FEMA funds are not for building better, but sort of replacing what was there, how often are they willing to refund the same damage over and over again? To build back the same. To build back the same.
What do you think, Troy? Is that repeatedly?
I'm not sure what that is.
I mean, that's the sort of the that's question what for all of this, we're is there's going for. only so much
That
money
question
available.
being
for
asked now
this to be done.
is sort of,
So
you know,
it's
sort of
pretty
pie in the sky, what if, but, you know, I don't know how long it's gonna be, but pretty soon there's gonna be no choice.
Right.
So forgive me if we're telling people what we already know, but Cape Elizabeth went through this.
Right.
But Cape Elizabeth made the decision, we're not gonna rebuild that road.
They changed their minds.
When the Maine Geology
Scarborough.
Society came out with that group, and I think you were here too, 2 summers ago, they just sort of just flat out said this road won't be here.
Right.
Right, well, I mean, I think that's a fair question. I mean, we're obviously, you look at sea level rise projections and that particular part of the coastline is under increasing threat. If you look at, you know, it's 4 feet, 8 feet, you know, it's not really tenable in the long run. So I think the question you raise is a really valid one. And the question is the future of that part of the seashore have a road on it? I think it's a really open question. I think Mother Nature might have her own ideas about that. But in the short term, certainly, you know, we're gonna have a road there. And maybe the next iteration, this kind of conversation can inform what happens if it were to be innovated again in, you know, 5, 10, 15 years. And because I was on that walk too, and it was really interesting, the different, you know, things you could possibly do. To, you know, because, you know, ultimately having the salt marsh be able to have room to expand and retreat further, and that helps mitigate impacts of climate change and flooding. So, you know, what opportunity are there to use natural existing, you know, nature, you know, the existing nature, the existing marsh to help, you know, mitigate future damage to the property higher up on the island, right? It's contain wave action, absorb, you know, flooding. That's I think where ultimately we're gonna want to go.
Or we might be forced to go.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole coast of the eastern coast of North America is going to be needing FEMA funds. So they're gonna be, at some point, really deciding which are the important things to spend it on and which are not. So we should probably be ready for, you know, that.
What would that process look like, getting ready for?
But I think, you know, we're gonna be launching, you know, on the, you know, One Climate Future, this is 5 years of One Climate Future, right? This is the 5th year, so we're actually preparing to launch the version 2 right away, which is gonna be heavily focused on resilience and adaptation. So that's the perfect time to have that conversation and thinking about what are long-term resilience strategies, you know, along, you know, for coastal resilience. And we're actually gonna be talking a lot about the upland and stormwater flooding as well. We think about like the 3, I call them the 3 bad things. We have sea level rise, so flooding from coastal flooding, but also stormwater is the second, you know, major challenge, both on islands and on the mainland. And then heat. Those are kind of the 3 major like natural hazards that I'm really concerned about. So as we develop having these conversations, thinking about what, you know, what are people on the island and in the neighborhood seeing as problems, and how do we build, you know, take that feedback and take community input and build those into the recommended solutions as the next part of our climate action planning. So this is I'm really excited to be part of the conversation because it's really timely, because we're really starting to lay down and do that work. That shoreline assessment I mentioned is part of updating our vulnerability assessment. So.
Yeah, maybe the FEMA build it back to whatever condition it was 24 hours before the event is actually very helpful like constraint that we all agree, this is idiotic. It's like we all walked around on the back shore a few days, a week after that storm, and saw this unbelievable damage.
Yeah.
So maybe the opportunity here is to think, well, it's going to be gone. What would we do if it's gone? And come up with some actual, think it through, do the math and say, this is where we think we could go and still be functional, as opposed to do stuff that is not going to help. We can see it's not going to help because we live on this island and there's very, you know, there's not a lot of stuff in the way of envisioning the next storm. And what it will.
Yeah, for sure. And then also thinking about, I mean, there's no guarantee that there will be a next FEMA funding, right? So, so having an idea of what we as a community want to see is gonna be really important.
Well, they're already saying you're on your own.
Right.
Portland, good luck.
Yeah.
No. So.
Yeah, so I don't know if it'd be part of, the current FEMA funding, but maybe it's finding other funding to do an alternatives analysis for Seashore Ave for the future, like looking forward, do some of that modeling. Like really think about what it will look like and what there are for feasible options, whether it's a bridge or removing the road or, those bigger solutions that the FEMA grant probably can't address right now because the constraints there won't let them, but that we know then you'll have something to use for future grants when the next big storm hits and we do have to address it again. I'm trying to think through concrete next steps we can do.
And like if you do something like a rec plan, thinking about what tourism circulation patterns are gonna look like on the islands if you change the road, like kind of having that vision.
Yeah.
Well, it would still be a perfectly viable path.
Right.
You know, the
When
walking.
did that get paved? The back shore.
This might not be a paved
Mm-hmm.
road.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, when did it get paid? I
When
mean,
did
my
when
guess,
did Seashore Ave get
yeah,
paved?
my guess is probably the military did it at some point.
No,
yeah.
it's paved.
It was
No,
paved, yeah.
Was it?
it didn't even seven.
Was it? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was say it again?
Built dirt in the 70s.
When my husband moved here in the early '70s, still good.
Was it?
So it was kind of a cosmic.
No, it was just.
Oh, it was a dirt road.
Yeah.
It was a dirt road.
Yeah, some of the old history books of Pete's Island talk
Yeah.
about having the road paved.
So
So,
what's wrong with just leave it? It's the dirt road now, gravel road. Wait. With that. Yeah. But so will a paved road.
I know,
Yeah,
but let's
so-
just say it's gonna get washed out, do the next thing, let's skip over the. 14 times we rebuild it. So, I mean, you're not gonna be
Fix the culverts. Do some of that other work that is needed sort of on an ordinary basis.
Yeah. I guess as we're like starting to wrap up, and I know some folks probably have to get going, like, I wanna think about who really wants to help drive these issues forward and like, maybe we'll keep the whole working group involved, obviously, but it might take a few people really dedicated to each issue, so we don't burn you all out on 70 different grant applications or something for everything the island wants to do. But there are a few folks that want me to connect with you to help think through like some of these next steps, like culvert assessments, vulnerability assessments, like.
I'm interested in the site visits with Emma and
Yeah,
identifying those sites. And then also looking at what kind of funding can we get, so whatever the evaluation recommendations are, that we can actually do it. If anybody else.
yeah, and Emma also mentioned there was some money available for like fire or at least advice.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the land reserve.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that was the 5,000 to 7,000 as long as it
Yes.
addressed wildfire, water related consumption, transportation.
yeah, so that would be a good one to consider, because I know wildfire definitely popped up in a lot of feedback on the survey and the workshop that folks have a lot of concerns about those. It's not often you find funding available for that specifically, so that's kind of a nice opportunity.
Well, PILB is addressing some of those issues. It just would be to get more information from other specialists or more. You know,
Yeah.
and choose which approach would be best for us.
Okay, so we'll connect with you guys on some of that. We'll toss out.
I'm happy to be involved.
Perfect. And we can think about too, like who else maybe wasn't here today that might also want to get involved with some of this stuff, like this might not be everybody. And what I'm gonna do too is send out meeting minutes of all, like that'll summarize what we talked about today, so there's more opportunity to collaborate via email and follow up on some of these next steps, I'll try to clearly outline some, like who's working on what, so we all know who to get in touch with.
And I want to add that the Peaks Island Council is renewing or reviving their Sustainability Environment Committee. So, kind of start meeting in January or February. I don't know what that will look like yet. We're still deciding that. So, but I made postings of that in our newsletter. So,
Great, yeah, it'd be good to have some kind of liaison between that group and this group to make sure, you know, kind of working on the same goals and moving the same projects forward. Okay, yeah, does anyone have any other last thoughts? And this is a long meeting, so thanks for sticking it through, but I think we covered a lot. I think we have some good ideas on to next steps to move this stuff forward. And it sounds like there's, you know, some good projects coming down the line that will have some good opportunities. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
You posted that we do you started with the way to update.
That's great.
This is.
Oh.